Okay, so let's evaluate now what happens to the demand schedule, both the table and the diagram, the curve, when one of the other determinants of demand changes. And let's start with the price of a related good, which we have labeled PY. Let's think about something very simple like bread. What happens when the price of bread increases? What happens to the demand for tomatoes? Well, the first thing we have to establish is whether bread is something you consume with tomatoes or is something you consume instead of tomatoes. Probably, if you have one of those two options, you have to say that bread is something you consume with the tomatoes, not instead. So something like, you need bread for a tomato sandwich, or you need bread in a hamburger, which you're going to put ketchup on it, which you need tomatoes. So bread and tomatoes are what we call complementary goods, are goods that you consume together, at least for some people. Now, if the price of bread changes, let's say the price of bread increases, well, now those people who only buy tomatoes to have a tomato sandwich, the tomato sandwich is now more expensive for those people. So the demand for tomatoes for those people is going to change. And it's going to change at every price. Let's start when the price is actually $4. Well, before the price of bread increased, you were demanding 6 tomatoes, and you will use those tomatoes in a tomato sandwich, or at least a lot of them. Well, now the tomato sandwich is actually a lot more expensive because bread is more expensive. So you are going to demand a lot less tomatoes at a price of 4. So let's say now you're going to demand now 4 tomatoes. And the same thing is going to happen to those people who were actually buying 4 tomatoes when the price of 6. Now they're going to buy a lot less tomatoes. And same happens with the people who are buying 2 tomatoes when the price of 8. Now those people are not going to buy any tomatoes at all. So all across the demand, what's happening is that people are going to buy a lot less tomatoes at every price simply because the price of bread is more expensive, and that makes a tomato sandwich more expensive, which means that you're going to demand less tomatoes than before. So what's changed here is that the whole structure of the demand have changed. You see, the market demand has less quantity of tomatoes bought at every price. So everything else is the same. The quantity of tomatoes at every price is different. And we can see that in the table. Now, if we want to represent that in the diagram, how would you represent that? Well, now, this is this point right here, that when the price of tomatoes was 4, the quantity demanded was 6. But now, when the price of tomato is 4, the quantity of tomatoes is 4. So that's a completely new point. And when the price of tomatoes was 6, before you have 4, which is this point right here, now it's going to be 2, right? So we're going to have to put a whole new point. And when the price of tomatoes is it's 8, it's up here, the demand for tomatoes at that point is actually 0. And when the price of tomatoes is 4, before you were consuming 6 tomatoes, now you're only going to consume 4 tomatoes. So you're actually at this point right here. And so forth to the point in which when the price of tomatoes is 0, you consume 8 tomatoes. So if you plot all the new points, see what happens is that this demand curve is essentially, you're going to have a new demand curve everywhere to the left of the original demand curve. So when the price of a complement like bread increases, the demand goes down because at every price you have less demand, less quantity of tomatoes, and when the demand goes down, that means the demand curve shifts to the left. If, on the other hand, the price of bread had decreased, we would have the opposite effect, and the demand curve would have shifted to the right. So this is the first thing you know, that when the price of a complement increases, the demand for tomatoes goes down, means that the curve shifts to the left. When the price of a complement decreases, the demand for tomatoes goes up, and that means that the demand curve shifts to the right. Now in the next one, we're going to see what's going to happen to when the price of substitute changes, which is something you consume instead of the good and not with the good.